Thank you. We're going to give a few more minutes for everyone to take your seats, and we'll get started. We've got some seats up front and in the center. Okay, it's a couple of more people who may want to get seats, so we'll wait on them. We can give them an applause as they make their way to their seats. Woo! Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the 15th Annual Mississippi on the Potomac reception. Tonight, we gather once more to renew our allegiance and our alliance with colleagues here in Washington, D.C., and recommit ourselves to bringing racial justice and equal opportunity to the state of Mississippi. We're delighted to pay tribute to two very distinguished members of the legal community, Karen Lash and Tony West, both of whom, yes. Karen and Tony have both devoted their life's work to promoting civil and human rights, diversity, and access to opportunity for all low-income Americans. The climate in our nation's capital these days feels especially stormy, with fresh blows striking every day against hard-won advances in racial equality, public welfare, and opportunity for all. Those of us from Mississippi and everywhere share the concern, and we urge you to help us hold on to our nation's commitment to equal justice under law. Starting last summer, our organization began to deepen its advocacy capacity through the development of a 10-year impact litigation initiative in the memory of one of our board members, George Riley. Yes. You will hear more about this later in the program, along with an update on our work in fair credit. But we also plow the fields for justice in education, health care, and fair housing. We hope you will find ways to work with us and our dedicated team of advocates and enjoy the satisfaction that we share with our pro bono partners, some of whom will be recognized tonight. Let me conclude by expressing on behalf of the Center's board, staff, and the clients that we serve, our gratitude to each and every one of you in this room. We are mindful that the Center's work would not be possible without your encouragement and your loyal support. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce the newest member of the Center's Board of Directors, the former Solicitor General of the United States, the Honorable Donald Verrilli.
So thank you very much. It's really a great privilege to be here tonight. And I'm especially glad to be part of an evening honoring two great people, Karen Lash and Tony West. During my time at the Department of Justice, I worked side by side with them and saw firsthand every day their dedication to the cause of justice. It was a great privilege to be with you then, and it's a great privilege to be with you tonight. Now, let me just say a word about why I decided to join the board of this great organization. I've known and admired Martha Bergmark for a long time, and I've known and admired Rob McDuff for a long time. In fact, Rob was a great help to me in some death penalty work I did in Mississippi many, many years ago, too many years to count now. So when they got together and launched the center in 2003, I expected great things, and the center has certainly delivered. But what really matters and what really speaks to me right now is the way the center has delivered. You know, our Constitution and our laws, they are just words on a page. They promise justice, but the words alone don't deliver justice. To make justice a reality and not just a promise, lawyers have to fight for it. And that's the lesson of our country's history, and that's what the center does every day, on the front lines, demanding justice for their clients, case by case, person by person, in housing, in education, in consumer protection, the basic rights and necessities that everyone deserves. And they do this every day. So I joined the center's board this year because right now, especially, I want to be part of an organization that is on the front lines, fighting to fulfill the promise of our Constitution and our laws. I think we all know that we are not going to be able to count on the federal government to be doing that during the next few years. You don't have a Tony West and you don't have a Karen Lash there right now. But even more fundamentally, what we're living through now reminds us that the struggle for justice never ends. Progress is not a guarantee. Sometimes things go backwards. So that's why the center's work matters now more than ever, and why I am especially grateful to have a chance to be part of it. So I want to thank each and every one of you here tonight for making the commitment to support the center. You're making a very big difference. Thank you. Now let me invite Riley Morse, the center's president, up.
Don, thanks to you for those wonderful remarks, and special thanks for joining Mississippi Center for Justice's board and committing your time and talents to the center. It's a great source of strength and pride for us all as we move through these difficult times. So this is a special evening for the center, and I want to welcome each and every one of you along with our predecessors here. As Laverne mentioned, it's our 15th annual event here in Washington to celebrate with our friends and colleagues and donors here. And I'm delighted to report it is our most successful ever, having raised $295,000. And just in case the spirit moves someone out there who likes round numbers, we're happy to take one more $5,000. Just see our friends in the back. The success of this event has been made possible by the generosity of each and every one of you. Every gift, large and small, matters so much to the clients that depend on us to be able to step into the breach when they're left to the winds of injustice in our state, to the indifference and hostility of the institutions that direct their lives in ways that they can't control or influence. We want to pay special tribute in this occasion to our event co-chairs, Danielle Gray, Neil McBride, Julie McAvoy, Tom Pirelli, Don Varelli, and to our Beacon of Hope sponsors, the Audrey Ermis Foundation for Social Justice and PepsiCo, to our underwriters, Barbara and David Lippman, to O'Melveny and Myers, and to our champions of justice, Davis, Polk, and Wardwell, Jenner and Block, Latham and Watkins, and Munger, Tolles, and Olson. We also would like to express thanks to Apple and Emerson Collective for having sponsored the George Riley Impact Litigation Initiative, which you'll hear more about shortly. If we could lift the lights up for just a moment, please. Can we do that? Is that possible? Looks, it's not possible, they tell me, so I'm going to have to ask y'all. Oh? All right. Way to go. We'd like to ask our center's board of directors, many of whom reside here, but also many who've come from Mississippi, to stand and be recognized for their dedication for the center's work. Would you please stand? Thank you. And we'd also like to now ask our magnificent staff all the way from Mississippi who've joined us here to please rise and also be recognized. Thank you all. Your work to promote racial and economic justice in our state each and every day inspires us all. I want to make special thanks for 3 people who make sure that this program has the preparation and attention to detail that ensures its success. They are Lauren Welford, Monica Galloway, and Dana Thomas. Thanks to each of you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Charles Lee, the Director of the Consumer Protection Division, and followed by him, Rob McDuff, who will be leading our new Impact Litigation Initiative. Charles?
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Good evening. Justice in Mississippi turns not only on high-profile impact cases, but also on widespread problems in the frontline institutions that dispense justice in the vast majority of civil cases affecting low-income persons, our small claims courts. Tens of thousands of adverse judgments for eviction, repossession, and money judgments are entered every year in Mississippi small claims courts against unrepresented, working poor defendants by judges who are not required to have any formal legal training. These judgments cripple the financial security of working poor Mississippians and deprive them of their legal rights. These problems are exacerbated by a system that lacks uniformity, even in the handling of similar cases, as became apparent to us by observations of justice courts in neighboring counties, Hinds and Rankin. Earlier this year, MCJ conducted a 2-month evaluation of justice courts in Hinds and Rankin counties using law student interns. We gathered evidence of how differently the judges treated defendants depending on whether or not they were armed with information about their legal rights or whether or not they were represented by an attorney. Here are some examples. In Rankin County, a case was called. The judge asked all parties to negotiate an agreement to avoid imposition of a default judgment. In Hinds County, a similar matter, the judge called a case, asked the defendant the amount that was owed, and immediately entered a judgment. Once the judgment was entered, the judge instructed the parties to meet outside the courtroom to discuss repayment. The case was handled in a matter of moments, but showed little attention to debt totals, fees, and a possible alternative resolution to a default judgment. The judge in Rankin County had a formal legal education. The 2 judges in Hinds County had none. The judge in Rankin County seemed comfortable when attorneys were present and had no problem challenging them when they lacked sufficient evidence. The Hinds County judges gave great deference to attorneys and never questioned them on principles of law or evidentiary standards. Beyond that, the judges handled basic questions of law differently, and in some instances delivered judgments that would clearly be overturned by an appellate court. These quick judgments do not serve the interests of justice and are fundamentally unfair to litigants. We believe we have some solutions to the problems plaguing some justice courts. First, we have developed a Know Your Rights brochure for defendants in justice court civil actions. It will be attached with the summons and complaint. It will be attached with the service of the summons and the complaint. We are working with the Mississippi College School of Law to develop a clinic for 2nd and 3rd year law students that will allow them to represent pro se litigants in justice court. Third, we would provide a training for the justice court judges regarding issues of debt collection and provide them with a bench book to guide them through the process. And finally, we will provide updates to the bench book and training as necessary. We believe that these actions will level the playing field and put the potential debtors and pro se litigants in a better position to defend against creditors. Please follow our work in this area and find ways to help us ensure that equal justice is guaranteed in all courts, large and small. Thank you.
Good evening. I was one of the lawyers in Mississippi who in 2003 conceived and launched the Mississippi Center for Justice. And I take great pride in the fact that I was the person who first suggested to Martha Bergmark that she come back to Mississippi to be the first president of this great organization. And like the invention of the internet, a lot of people claim to have suggested that first to Martha, but it was me. And I've said they're going to put that on my tombstone as one of my great accomplishments. When we envisioned the center, we were very conscious of the legacy of the offices that had been operated in Mississippi in the 1960s and 1970s by the great civil rights law organizations in this country, including the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Lawyers Constitutional Defense Committee, and so many others. Those offices, with the progress of the civil rights movement, had closed their doors eventually, the last being the Lawyers Committee, which closed its office on Fair Street in Jackson in the early 1980s. We wanted to create a nonprofit public interest law firm to resurrect and carry on the legacy of those offices into the 21st century. And the center has done that and has done it much more effectively and much more extensively than we imagined back then. And now, at this rather perilous time when the Department of Justice is stepping back from the enforcement of civil rights, I am pleased to report that the Mississippi Center for Justice is stepping up with its new impact litigation project. And the leaders of that organization have been very kind to invite me to join them in launching and implementing that project. Our wonderful president, Riley Morse, secured the funding for it from Apple and from the Emerson Collective in honor of the late George Riley. George, for those of you who don't know, George Riley is a native of Memphis, Tennessee. He worked as a lawyer at O'Melveny and Myers in California and was the longtime counsel for Apple and for Steve Jobs. And he was a member of the board of the Mississippi Center for Justice for many years, having first encountered the organization when he came down as a volunteer after Hurricane Katrina and joined the center in assisting many of the victims of that hurricane with their legal needs, and really became so involved with the organization that he was a member of the board and just one of the great presences in the center over the years. Because of the support of the Apple and Emerson in honor of George Riley, and because of Riley Morse's vision, this impact litigation project has been staked for the next 10 years. At present, very early in the life of the project, we are in the appellate courts defending a preliminary injunction obtained last year against Mississippi's notorious House Bill 1523, an anti-LGBT statute masquerading as a religious freedom measure. Unfortunately, we had a decision last Thursday from a panel of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversing that injunction, but we are moving forward. We're going to seek rehearing in bank. If that doesn't work, we're going to seek certiorari. If that doesn't work, we're going to go back, if that law is implemented, and be looking for plaintiffs to challenge it again. And I've said to people, I said, even if we don't win this case in the long run, we stop that bill for a year, and that in itself is a victory. Because it's really amazing. It reflected, there were so many people after this law was passed and signed by the governor of all political persuasions who came out and protest against that bill. And even though it is supported by a majority of the legislature, we know that we're right about this, no matter what the courts say, and we're gonna continue that fight. We are planning a lawsuit against the felon disenfranchisement provisions of the post-Reconstruction Constitution of 1890 in Mississippi, which disenfranchised and took away the vote from people convicted of certain offenses that at the time were perceived to be disproportionately committed by African Americans. We are joining the fight against debtors' prisons and against unaffordable bail for people accused of nonviolent offenses. And we are looking at a variety of potential cases in the areas that are within the Mississippi Center for Justice's mandate. In the lead up to the conclusion of his speech at the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. King said, "Let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California, but not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia, let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee, let freedom ring from every hill and molehill in Mississippi." And we are going to do our best in the coming years to protect the right to vote in every hill and molehill in Mississippi. And as part of that, we're not only going to monitor the redistricting after 2020 of the state legislature and the congressional districts, but we, in the coming years, are going to be collecting the data on the demographics of every redistricting plan for the county governing boards in all of Mississippi's 82 counties, for the city councils in all of Mississippi's largest cities and towns, so that when they go to redistrict after the 2020 census, we are going to be able to identify those jurisdictions that are backsliding in terms of African American political power, in terms of the number of African American majority districts, and we are going to be there with lawyers and experts and everything we need to take them to court if and when that happens. I shouldn't have said if and when that happens, when that happens. And finally, in many instances, we are going to be taking on these cases in conjunction with friends from other organizations and from law firms large and small. So we look forward to working with many of you in the coming years. We appreciate your support for all the work the center does, including this very exciting project during this very interesting time. Thank you so much.
Excellent, Rob. Very happy you're doing this work. So my name is David Stern, and I am the Executive Director of Equal Justice Works, and it is my great pleasure to be presenting tonight's Mississippi Center for Justice Award to Karen Lash. Yeah, I have known Karen since I joined Equal Justice Works 25 years ago. She was the Associate Dean at USC Law School, and she was the champion and Pied Piper for everything public interest. Karen was such an effective leader and such an inspiration to many of us that we got her on our board of directors, and then I hired her as our Vice President of Programs at Equal Justice Works. So flash forward to 2005, Katrina struck the Gulf. Remember those images of the Superdome? I hardly need to remind you. The thousands of homes destroyed and lives disrupted. I remember so vividly in our offices just the feeling of outrage and upset by the injustices that we saw on television, and quite literally when we reached out to our allies and friends in the Gulf, many of those individuals at legal aid organizations were not there because they too, their lives were disrupted by the storms. So Karen had started volunteering for MCJ, and we asked her to go down and survey the situation, since we couldn't get in touch with our friends, and to tell us where lawyers and law students could make a difference. Well, we got her harrowing report. We raised $2 million, and we sent 19 lawyers to the Gulf within 2 months. One thing that really stood out from Karen's first report was that there was this incredible lawyer who she met, whose offices were destroyed as a result of the hurricane. And she said, we absolutely needed to have this guy as one of our first fellows that we funded. He was a civil rights lawyer. He was an organizer. He was somebody who could hit the ground running. And sure enough, the very first fellow that we funded was Riley Morse, now the executive director, president, and CEO of Mississippi Center for Justice. So, of course, that was good judgment on Karen's part. So after Karen saw the problems in the region, she worked with MCJ to coordinate a massive pro bono program. She enlisted dozens of law firms, scores of law schools, sent thousands of law students and lawyers down to the Gulf in order to be able to help deal with all those pressing injustices. So that was just in and of itself a really remarkable chapter in Karen's life, and she made one hell of a difference. So let me pivot now from Mississippi to Karen's most recent job in the Department of Justice's Office of Access to Justice. So Larry Tribe, you may remember, was the first director of the office, and he said to me and many others, I'm sure if some of you will remember this, we have no money, we have no authority, we have a tiny staff, the most we got is our bully pulpit. Well, one of the best things that Larry Tribe did was to hire Karen Lash. Karen was not interested in being a government bureaucrat or simply to shine the light on the injustices in this country. She saw that most of the government, federal government, was ignorant or not aware about the role of legal aid, even though it is such an important asset in terms of achieving agencies' objectives. So Karen came up with an idea, the Legal Aid Interagency Roundtable, also known as LAIR. LAIR would bring together executives from the different agencies, and they would make commitments about integrating legal aid into their agency's work. That idea became a reality thanks to many of you in this room, and most particularly thanks to our other honoree, Tony West. LAIR is not some bully pulpit or bureaucratic commission. This group gets things done. And you don't have to take my word for it. If you go and read the report that was recently issued by that office, you will be so impressed and amazed by all of the things that they accomplished. Finally, one last accomplishment that I want to highlight. While Karen was at the Department of Justice, she collaborated with Tony West on the bank settlement that resulted in $400 million of support for legal aid. That's worth an applause. So what's next for Karen Lash? Happily, she's continuing to do this work. She's replicating what she did successfully in the Department of Justice at the American University's Justice Programs Office and trying to replicate that model in states around the country. So you can see why Karen Lash is so deserving of tonight's award. But that's not all. Karen is one of the nicest people I know. She is just such an inspiration to me. I love her family, Martha, Oscar. So happy that you're here to be able to celebrate tonight. And of course, the night would not be complete if I didn't do a quick shout out to their dog, Lucky, who's my dog's best friend. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure tonight to give this award to Karen Lash. Coming up here. Turn around, you have to have a picture taken, and I'll put mine down for you. Good, yeah, we need louder.
So that was humbling. Thank you, David. And thank you, my beloved MCJ, for this honor. And the chance to do, as the legendary Fannie Lou Hamer told us, never forget where we come from and always praise the bridges that carried us over. The bridges I'd like to praise are MCJ, DOJ, and friends and family. First, MCJ. Mississippi saved me. Who knew that a Jewish lesbian lawyer from Los Angeles would ever say that? But a dozen years ago, Katrina created a crisis at a time of personal crisis for me. My mother had just died, I was newly single, and shuttling between DC and LA to care for my father. When I called Martha Bergmark about doing a DC fundraiser, and she asked me to go to Jackson instead, I agreed to 5 days. But like so many, I got caught in that Mississippi mud. I'd never been to the Deep South. I'd not seen the disaster before the disaster, the poorest state in the country. And then my father died. So I was a grieving mess. And there was this moral imperative like I'd never seen in front of me. Helping felt like the best way to honor my parents' memory and their lifelong commitment to social justice. So the people who became my Mississippi family, including Riley and Christina at the Heart Center, they took me into their homes as we worked to literally and figuratively rebuild. Over that work and grits, some of that grief subsided with their amazing and healing generosity. Because Katrina blew in a nightmare. Everything and everyone cried out for legal help. FEMA's dysfunction, Mississippi's misplaced priorities, ugly predatory behavior, and the list goes on. One of the biggest challenges was over an unfinished housing recovery made worse when Mississippi decided to divert $500 million of its federal dollars for a massive expansion of a state port. Fortunately, the hurricane also blew in the very best. The amazing Martha Bergmark was gifted in harnessing it as she, Monica, Bonnie, and the board opened a coast office and hired the incomparable John Jopling and Riley, as you heard, thanks to Equal Justice Works. Alongside the Mississippi Bar, for the first time since Freedom Summer 1964, legions of lawyers and students converged on Mississippi to do FEMA benefits appeals, eviction and foreclosure defense, insurance disputes, whatever was needed. So thank you all to those who showed up and who showed up again tonight. Here also in spirit is George Riley, who became the most extraordinary volunteer, the gift of an introduction to me from my brother David O'Melveny's pro bono counsel. So Rob, you may claim Martha, I claim George. But the racial dividing line between those who got federal rebuilding funds and those who didn't persisted until 5 years after the storm, when we invited Obama's appointee as HUD Assistant Secretary Mercedes Marquez down to Gulfport, and she aimed to fix that. $200 million later, 5,000 households, mostly African American, were back in livable condition. That is the power of MCJ, Riley's refusal to give up, our volunteers, the feds, and Gerald Blessey, Governor Barber's housing director, who's here tonight and now on MCJ's board. Those efforts changed thousands of Mississippians' lives and helped heal up mine, too. So that process also made me realize the power of federal lawyering, leading to my second bridge. I got to join the dedicated troop of President Obama's appointees and work in DOJ's Office for Access to Justice. Like Mississippi, we had to do a lot with a little. When Attorney General Eric Holder directed our little policy shop to go do justice, he didn't give us the usual federal tools that motivate people like grant-making authority or enforcement authority. But together with the most creative, committed colleagues like Lisa Foster, Bob Bullock, Ali Yang Green, Andrew Stanner, Bill Killebrew, Ben Hernandez-Stan, and Maha Jawed, we discovered lots of useful tools hidden in the corners of federal policy and procedures. One biggie was convening authority, which we used to create LAIR. LAIR's bottom line: federal programs do a better job for low-income and other underserved people when they include legal aid. For example, more people with criminal records get jobs, more seniors are protected from abuse, more immigrant children find refuge from violence. You get the pattern. So 22 agencies, and 5 years later, LAIR unlocked hundreds of millions of dollars and all kinds of other resources so legal aid could help make government programs more effective, more efficient, and fair. Now, a few co-conspirators are here tonight. The list got longer during the reception. So in one breath, I want to thank Kate Peterson, Stacey Grigsby, Julie McAvoy, Sam Hirsch, Tova Calderon, Cindy Chang, Pippa Scarlett, native Mississippian Shirlethia Franklin, and John Gould, who's also a new colleague at my new professional home at AU's Justice Programs Office. But yes. But nothing would have happened without the leadership of ATJ's early bosses, Associate AGs Tom Pirelli and my co-honoree tonight, Tony West. To you both and to all my DOJ colleagues, I thank you on behalf of the thousands of people who will never know your names, but whose lives are better because of your efforts. So P.S. to Tony. Sharing this honor with you gives me a huge upgrade. Everything DOJ related celebrated tonight is thanks to your courage and genius. You co-chaired LAIR, and you got more legal aid to people who suffered from the financial crisis via the largest settlement in DOJ history. Now, I knew you'd accomplish great things when we first met around 1990. When I was a law firm associate recruiting you to Tuttle and Taylor for the summer. But I didn't dream I'd get to thank you publicly for your work to establish marriage equality, which deeply affected my wife, our son, and me. And since I'm talking marriage equality, a shout out to Don Varelli, who nailed the oral arguments. Which leads me, finally, to bridge number 3. I've been blessed with extraordinarily supportive family and friends. David Stern, you have always inspired me to dream bigger than makes sense and then go do it. You also taught me it's okay to cry at the podium. Audrey Ermis, who kept me in law school with a scholarship because she believed in my dreams of a social justice career. Heartfelt appreciation for my big brother David, a beacon of justice himself and his family, as well as our parents, Ed and Gloria Lash, who baked into our very core a commitment to join with others to try to heal the world. I walked in their shoes post-Katrina and through the halls of DOJ. Then there's my new family. I married into a big and loyal one with 11 of those many Ertmans and in-laws here tonight. Yeah, they're noisy too. And Oscar, when we met, you were just 2.5 years old and I fell in love. It is an unparalleled joy to be your other mom. Nothing makes me prouder than to see you grow up and your fiercely held beliefs about justice and fairness take root. At last, my wife, Martha. When we were first dating and I told you about MCJ and the goal of making Mississippi the social justice state, you questioned my grasp on reality. But you quickly gave up on cynicism and became my biggest champion. Being married to you and a parent with you, and the outstanding man you chose for a dad, Victor, and now his husband, Jeff, see what you guys did? has brought me more happiness than I dared to imagine. And one final last thank you, I know it's endless, you're patient, is for all that you all are doing and will do for MCJ, especially at this moment when the rule of law itself is under fire in the United States. It's been the honor of a lifetime to work with so many of the very best, and to say so here with so many of my heroes and bridges in the room. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tom Pirelli, and like a number of other folks, I am a recovering Justice Department lawyer. It is an honor to be here on behalf of the Center to introduce Tony West, but it is also an honor to follow the marvelous Karen Lash. You've got some sense of the work that the Access to Justice Initiative did at the Justice Department, taking really what was truly nothing and making it something extraordinary, and in small ways understanding all the different aspects of the federal bureaucracy where people struggle to access services and to have the opportunity to be represented. And Karen, it's an honor for me to stand on the same stage as you, and thank you for all the work that you have done. As a number of people I think have intimated or just said, it is now a time to stand up and be counted. That's something that our next honoree, Tony West, has done really at every moment of his legal career. He dedicated himself to public service from early in his days as a lawyer. When it was in private practice, he represented folks who nobody else wanted to represent, folks who were unpopular, folks who needed representation. But then he came to the Justice Department, and we had the opportunity to work together, where he headed the Civil Division. And if he wanted to help the average, everyday citizen of this country, the working poor, the immigrants, anybody who was harmed, the Civil Division, not the place you would go. Civil Division is a place where you recover large amounts of money for the federal government. Civil Division is the place where you defend federal regulations. Civil Division is the place where you argue to every federal court you can find that every immigrant that is in detention should be there. It has been a place, many a Washington lawyer has taken that job and found themselves quite comfortable making those arguments. That's not the way Tony saw it. From day one, Tony saw the opportunity to help Americans in a way, from that perch, in a way different from any of his predecessors. He saw the opportunity to help consumers, to protect them, to become really from the federal government's perspective, the tip of the spear when it came to protecting LGBT rights. He saw that from the Civil Division and his subsequent perch as the Associate Attorney General, the chance to help get representation for undocumented immigrants, to make arguments to courts about when the United States was wrong, something that is very difficult for the Justice Department to do, to protect and really invest in our Native American communities, some of the poorest communities in our country, a place where, for those of us who've worked in those communities know, lawyer after lawyer, foundation after foundation, government agency and government agency are afraid to go, but Tony didn't hesitate. And so he looked at an organization that needed transformation and truly transformed it. And while I can't say truly that it's going to last for the next 4 years, for the last 8 years, that organization has become a remarkable place in its efforts to protect consumers, and that is all because of Tony. And that has all because of Tony's vision. Now, Tony now has a major private sector job as the general counsel of PepsiCo, and he has managed to take on perhaps the biggest obstacle one could possibly imagine in that new job, diversity in the bar. For those of you who've been working on that issue for years, it has been an intractable issue and seems to be getting worse. But I have seen Tony's efforts and look forward to the opportunity of collaborating. And I think there is no leader in the bar today who is more likely to change the cycle that we are in law firms large and small in terms of promoting diversity. I don't think there's any leader in the bar more likely than Tony to move us forward in a way, in a place that we have never been before. And I really look forward to the opportunity for Tony to do that. So with that, it is my honor to introduce the Honorable Tony West, the next recipient of the Mississippi Center for Justice Award.
Wow, wow, humbling. Tom, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Tom has been at various times my boss, my predecessor, now my outside counsel. Although I actually think many of you can claim that title. But I'm most proud of the fact that Tom is my friend. Tom, thank you not only for co-chairing this, but thank you for the incredible service and sacrifice and dedication that you gave to this country as Associate Attorney General under President Obama's administration. Thank you for that. Let me also commend Riley Morse for his extraordinary leadership of MCJ. Thank you, Riley, for really continuing to drive MCJ's mission of creating a healthy, just, more equitable Mississippi Gulf Coast through all of the incredible work that you do. So thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge some folks who are here, my PepsiCo colleagues, my new PepsiCo family, who I'm so proud to work with every single day. I'm so proud to be one of your colleagues. And there are so many friends from the Justice Department who are here tonight, and I am so honored by your presence. I'd be remiss if I didn't take just a few moments to say something about the co-chairs of tonight's event. Don Verrilli, of course, who you heard from earlier, the former Solicitor General of the United States, now at Munger Tolles. Neil McBride, the former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, and now at Davis Polk. Julie McAvoy, who was my former deputy in the Associate's Office and is now back at Jones Day. And Daniel Gray, who is the former Secretary of Cabinet Affairs for President Obama, and someone with whom I was so fortunate to work with in the Civil Division and who is now at O'Melveny. Each one of these individuals is an extraordinary lawyer. Each one is an extraordinary public servant. And I was so privileged to work with each one of them at various times during my own public service. And, any one of them frankly, would be as suited, if not better suited than I, to be honored tonight, because every single day that Tom and Don and Neil and Julie and Danielle, every day they labored in the service of the public good, our country was enriched. And I have to say, all of us are beneficiaries of that service. So thank you. And believe me when I tell you that as every day goes by, we are more sentimental and more thankful for that service. And of course, one more acknowledgement before I make some very brief remarks. You know, it is always a wonderful gift to have great friends in life. It is a particular blessing to have longtime friends that you admire in life. I so deeply admire Karen Lash. I first met Karen when we were both in our 20s, as she said, and she almost recruited me to go to Tuttle and Taylor. It was the best summer experience that an associate could have. Karen was then, as she is now, an incredible force of hope, of energy, of inspiration, of perseverance, of caring, of justice. She cares so much about using the law to advance fairness for every single person. She has made an enormous difference in the lives of so many Americans through her groundbreaking work. And witnessing Karen's courage and her dedication up close was a great privilege, and I am so honored to be able to share this evening with you tonight. So let me just briefly say that, you know, on nights like this, I'm reminded that all of us stand on platforms of progress that are built by others. And oftentimes, our own success is also the measure of somebody else's dream, somebody else's sacrifice, somebody else's sweat. A parent, a grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, a teacher, a pastor, a mentor. And I'm reminded that I'm here in no small measure because someone, actually many someones, along my path pushed me and said, you know, I believe you can do this. I believe you will do this. And in thinking about this award, I've been thinking a lot about one of my own early mentors in the law, a remarkable, remarkable woman who passed away late last year, former Attorney General Janet Reno. And when I was a young attorney, not long out of law school, I had the good fortune, like many of you, to work for Ms. Reno. And like she did with many of you, she took an interest in me, encouraged me to explore different parts of the law, in fact, encouraged me to become a federal prosecutor, which I did. And as many of you have heard me speak about this before, you know, I talk about how before I left Maine Justice, Ms. Reno asked to see me, and in the course of our meeting, she showed me that inscription that several of you have seen in the walls of the Attorney General's office in Maine Justice that reads that great quote from the Berger United States Supreme Court case, that the United States wins its case when justice is done. And I've talked about how Ms. Reno told me that when I went out to California to become an assistant U.S. attorney, my job wasn't to win as many cases as I could, but rather to do justice in every case that I handled. And looking around this room and marveling at the incredible work that so many of you have done, so many of you have provided such great service in your own careers. I suspect that I am not the only person Janet Reno said that to. I felt very special at the time, but I suspect she said that to a lot of people. And we all know what she meant by that. She meant that, you know, when you go out there and you're in a courtroom and you stand up, and particularly if you say your name on behalf of the United States, you're not just talking about yourself. You're not speaking on behalf of yourself. You're speaking for all of us. You're speaking for the rich. You're speaking for the poor. Those who reside and occupy the halls of privilege and power, as well as those who find no voice there. You're talking about all of us. And in recent months, I have been thinking a lot about that, about the importance of each of us to find the courage to do justice, especially now, in the work that so many of us do as officers of the court. It's the courage that so often defines the work of the lawyer. There are many young lawyers and law students here tonight. The work of the lawyer is that deep and abiding faith in the rule of law that protects our republic, coupled with this fervent commitment to justice. Because as a free people, we know that the rule of law without justice is tyranny. It's courage that Dr. King called answering the call at the knock at midnight. It's the courage to be able to stand up and speak truth when no one else will or no one else can. And when I think about the work of this incredible center, MCJ, and the individuals at the center of that work, folks who've dedicated themselves to the pursuit of racial and economic justice for the most disenfranchised of Mississippians, I know they know what that courage means. The courage that MCJ has displayed for decades to respond to unmet legal needs and untangle a system with well-entrenched policies that seem perniciously designed to deny the poor and thousands of Mississippians access to meaningful opportunities to advance themselves, to the ballot box, to economic justice. MCJ, you've protected fair housing for hundreds of low-income residents. You've dismantled a Jim Crow-era school board election system in the Mississippi Delta. You're continuing to stand up for the victims of Hurricane Katrina long after the waters have receded and the television cameras have departed. You're standing up for LGBT Mississippians for whom discrimination is not history, but present day. And you're standing up for those who work the hardest, but have the least. So, MCJ, you're no stranger to courage. And nor are any of you who are here tonight, because you are standing up to support this incredible organization and their important work and their engagement. And that work and that engagement and that courage is needed now more than ever before. So let me thank MCJ, let me thank each of you, not just for being here tonight, but for all that you do and continue to do to advance the cause of justice. Thank you for this very humbling honor tonight.
Okay. I'm going to have to stop for a second. Do you all know that expression that you hear lawmakers say here in Washington, I would like to revise and extend my remarks? Y'all know that one, right? That's one I actually heard my father say when I was a little boy, because he was a state legislator, and he would sort of talk mockingly about his fellow colleagues in the state legislature. And I asked Dad, what does that mean, Dad, to revise and extend your remarks? And he says, that's when a legislator goofs. Well, I goofed, so I would like your permission to revise and extend my remarks when it came time to honor our champions of justice, because I'm embarrassed to say I omitted one of our champions of justice, Wilmer Hale, who's represented here tonight by Tom White. Thank you, Wilmer Hale, among all my others. We greatly appreciate you, and I hope that the record will show a seamless success there and not this embarrassing blunder of mine. We'd like to next turn to a moment to express our thanks to all of the law firms who have provided their time and expertise to help advance our clients' needs over the past 12 months. That's really sort of at the core of why we have this event here in Washington, D.C. It's to continue this extraordinary tradition that's gone on for 50 years or more of the attorneys, the finest attorneys of the D.C. bar, stepping in and helping people in the Deep South who really need that extra power, that extra skill set that it takes at times to bring the case across the finish line. And while the Center for Justice is focused on making that talent and keeping that talent and growing that talent here at home, there are always occasions where we just need to reach out and get a hold of some of the best and the brightest that are here. And we want to thank all of you who have participated as pro bono partners of ours tonight, but among them we want to particularly thank two firms whose efforts stand out over the past year, the first being the firm Venable, whose team of 11 lawyers contributed 400 hours towards a fair housing case on behalf of tenants in Ridgeland, Mississippi, and they're represented by Seth Rosenthal here tonight. Thank you, Seth, and your firm. And the second firm is O'Melveny and Myers, who contributed over 500 hours from a team of, I think, 5, but it could have been 100 for all I know, but at least 5 attorneys on behalf of Mississippi's public school students in our quest to secure adequate education funding for all. Thank you, Michael Walsh. Together, these two firms' efforts are valued at over $500,000, which might just make, the monthly rent payment for some of you bigger firms. But for us and for the clients we serve, it is a massive, massive gift, and it helps us produce lasting change. So please join me for a moment in thanking both Venable and O'Melveny and Myers. Seth, if you would step up for a moment, please. And now Mike Walsh. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Well, it's a rare night when an event in D.C. ends within a minute of when we promised. We're there, friends. And I could prolong the joy here, but I just simply want to end by thanking you once more, wishing you safe travels home, and encouraging you, if you are interested in knowing more about Mississippi, to come to our event in October, the Champions of Justice Dinner, where we'll be honoring, among others, the former Navy Secretary and Governor Ray Mabus, and the historian Dr. Halvertine Harrison. And if any of you are really interested in Mississippi, we have a wonderful Great Mississippi Road Trip, which will take you through the back roads of Mississippi and show you a part of America that will get in your blood and never leave. So with all that, we say thank you so much. Good night. We hope to see you next year. Thank you.